So this is the next epic or whatever. I'll try and keep it very brief. Probably won't be, you know me. But based around, I know it finished last year, the year before. COVID kind of muddles it all up, doesn't it? But Vikings, obviously, as you can see from the title, such a wealth of characters and kind of a mix between the historical and the myth and the factual, isn't it? Obviously, I will try to just stick to the show and not drift into a kind of history lesson or whatever. But yeah, Vikings, it's obviously about more or less the tales of Ragnar and his offspring, Ragnar Lothbrok, who may or may not have existed in many forms or whatever during that time. Possible. Suppose we'll never know, but it's good stories, and he did spawn real kings of my country and Ireland and obviously France, that kind of whole family and such like. So yeah, I'm not going to waffle on about it. It's a great period, and obviously being from the part of England, England, that I am, obviously this northern connection, because our country was of course split in the end, wasn't it, along the Danelaw. So I think up here we have much more of an affinity, a connection. Our DNA probably runs closer to the Viking people who came over, whereas down in the south, obviously, the ruthless Angles and Saxons, who were also invaders. Never quite understood why the Vikings get such a bad rep in history, but the Angles and the Saxons, who basically worked their way across the country, killing everyone they ever saw in sight, and then the Normans with the French and all that, again massacring people en masse, seem to be so beloved. Maybe because the Anglo-Saxons, as they became, were Christians. Again, yeah, less said about that the better. Obviously the killing everyone who doesn't agree with your thing back then was quite hot, wasn't it? But anyway, I'm waffling. But yeah, it's why I think we all love the stories of the Vikings and stuff, but why I think a lot of us in the north of England have a certain stronger affinity and connection to Scandinavia. I am a blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy after all. Although, yeah, I'm also short and chubby, so where this connection goes, I don't know. Anyway, get on with the video. How would I send the characters from Viking? So yeah, obviously we got to start with Ragnar Lothbrok. Hair trousers, does that mean, or something? Something like that. He's obviously the inspiration of all these myths, stories, facts, who knows. But he was a character who probably did come to England and explore, etc. Anyway, that's the thing. In the show, he kind of becomes the leader, the Jarl of his particular tribe, if you like, or town, Kattegat, which is a real place and was a really important place in them times. Obviously he starts exploring and sees the fine booty and jewellery and stuff that he could take from England, especially the monasteries around the north. Anyway, again, that's going into the history. Ragnar himself is quite a cheeky chappy when he starts off. He's pretty cocky and arrogant, but he's a family man. Obviously going on his raids and such like, he's perhaps not the most loyal, etc. And as he gets older, he becomes more tortured by what he's done and the way he's behaved. And there's certain characters that influence him greatly that will go into more depth later on, but obviously Lagertha, Floki, Athelstan, his children, his other wife, all these people have a big effect on him, and he never really wants to be a king. He likes the Viking life, if you like. Obviously he gets put there. But anyway, what I've picked for Ragnar, now again, wait for the connection to Rollo. I have picked Dupont. And the reason I've picked this is, if you imagine going back to the 90s, the sort of people who'd wear Dupont were kind of your crazy wildlife party people, wanted to make an impression. It's sweet, it's obnoxious, it's in your face, very much like Ragnar. It's something everyone would like, everyone would warm to, everyone would come around. And I think, again, I know, he picked Dupont, but I couldn't think of another fragrance that suited him more. And again, wait for the Rollo connection. But yeah, I think that would be something he would have rocked back then. You could say Aventus, but nah, I don't think he'd be that tedious. I don't even think that makes as big an impression. I don't think that's as iconic as Dupont. So yeah, that's Ragnar and Dupont. Of course, next on the list is another king, probably the greatest of these Vikings of this era. Yeah, again, stories are different and what have you, but Rollo starts off obviously very much in Ragnar's shadow. There are a lot of clashes, a lot of, bad things that happen. He's also in love with Lagertha. It's just kind of a very close brotherly relationship, and the fact that they're quite different as well. Rollo's more chilled, more laid back, and in the end he happens to go to Francia, France, and actually ends up with his own kingdom. And he's a very sort of noble, great leader. He kind of unites the Christians of Europe by being baptised, and protects Francia from a lot of the Viking raids and such like. So he's a really important figure in history, as well as being sort of, obviously, not massively a main character in this one, because a lot of what he does is off screen. Go through that mud bath there. So yeah, what have I picked for Rollo? I picked Jean-Paul Gaultier's Le Mal. See, now the Dupont makes sense, in the sense that these were both the very big popular ones of their time that all the cool kids wore. But I think different sorts of people wore them. Like, I was a bit of a dupe person, more kind of, not quite as, much of a pretty boy or what have you, that of course were the Le Mal boys. And if we know Le Mal, it's lavender, lots of vanilla, mint. It's kind of a fougere, but sweetened, modern version of it, if you like. And again, this suits Rollo quite a lot, because he is the good looking charmer. Everyone kind of liked him. Obviously we're talking back at the time, but like Le Mal and Dupe, their names have lasted through the eras. See, there you go, there's a good connection. But yeah, I think Rollo, he probably wouldn't wear this now, but yeah, he is the kind of proud, popular, massively influential one. Again, quite game-changing of his time. Clearly, to have a heathen who converted and united two groups of people, and of course helped make France great. So yeah, for Rollo is Le Mal, which is also a French perfume, so there you go. And Dupont being German, Germanic, like the Scandinavians. But anyway, there we go. Next we have the great legend that is Lagertha. Do we need to say more? Obviously in the show I think she's a lot more kind of pivotal as perhaps she was, but the myth is she was a great shield maiden, great protector, a great warrior. And in the show she kind of starts off not in the shadow of Ragnar, but kind of she's not blossoming as her own power as of yet. She's a big part of what he does and his kingdom and such. So yeah, early on in the show she splits with Ragnar and goes to bring up their son Björn, who will come later, who again is another great legend. And she goes back to her place where she ultimately becomes queen of that people. The Sweden area, obviously the lands aren't defined back then, but yes, she has her own kingdom. She leads them very proudly. Her people come to the help of Ragnar and his people, and vice versa. And she grows and grows, and as a character and as a person, and she becomes stronger and more powerful. She's very much a warrior queen in the show. She kind of goes to England as a queen to foster the land and settle and grow trading posts and farms in East Anglia, and that goes a bit wrong for various reasons. And she returns home, where eventually she becomes the queen and the ruler of Connecticut, and meets a very kind of sad demise, an accidental demise, but a sad demise that she knew was coming, again after saving the people from raiders and such like. And she just returns to kind of go check out stuff. But anyway, enough said about that. What have I picked for Lagertha? It's really difficult, this one. I have to circle between a few, but I've gone for Bohemian, not just because it's Swedish and what have you, but it has everything she has a presence, it has a warmth, a sweetness, fun side, a bombastic side, the dark leathery side, like what she would have worn and that, and the proud side. And I just think it's the sort of fragrance a warrior queen would wear to kind of stand out and be respected, etc, etc. I'm not going to waffle on these things. We've all seen the show and it's kind of a brief overview. So yeah, for Lagertha is Swedof's Bohemian. Floki is a really interesting character, and he's up next, and he's probably my favourite, although sometimes you do not like him. But he's a man who's connected to the gods and the old ways, and he never really changes his beliefs or path for that. And he practices all, like, you know, the prayers and the rituals of the old things, and he doesn't like to see how things change and how his friends around him change. And in the show you never really know what side he's on or what he's up to, but there's always something behind Floki. There's always a reason. He is loyal to Ragnar ultimately, and then when Ragnar dies and the brothers fall out in the show, not in real life, he gives up and lets the gods take him wherever they take him. So he gets on a raft and he's gone, and he ends up in Iceland, where he then goes back and gets a settlement in Iceland. And Floki kind of is given the credit in history of discovering and settling Iceland, I believe. He also discovers Greenland in the show and North America. He's spoilers if you've not seen it, tune out now, but he's one of the last characters you see as the sun sets, and I think it's the perfect end. Unlike most shows, it's actually a perfect end to it, and you're kind of glad Floki didn't die, which again I suppose shows his connection to the gods and his just wanting to be away from man and honour his life to that sort of thing. He tries to set up a society as well in Iceland in a kind of a new way, a democratic way if you like, but yeah, some people don't really like that. But again, I believe Iceland has the oldest parliament on earth, so again this idea, whether it existed or not, remains in Iceland, and Iceland has remained a very prosperous, peaceful country, part of Europe but not really. It's very much its own place. So yeah, that's Floki, and what I've picked for Floki is Amouage's Interlude Man. Now if you know this fragrance, you'll kind of get why. It smells like burning herbs on a bonfire. It's dark, it's smoky, and you can kind of imagine this as a ritualistic kind of smell, taking you back to something primal, something ancient, and the dark smoke fills the air. The herbs, although that's the bit I struggle with it, are calm and relaxing, and that natural smell of maybe a Viking bonfire whilst they're carrying out some sort of sacrifice or something or other. So I think it's absolutely perfect for Floki. So, yep, no more waffling. For Floki is Amouage's Interlude. So next is one of the most famous from this time period in real life. Probably the most famous potentially of Ragnar's sons, though more in the Scandinavian kind of thing than the UK. And that's Björn Ironside. Now we've watched Björn grow up. He's brought up when his mum and dad kind of split up. He sees quite a lot in his childhood, and then they split up, and he goes off with his mum, and he has a lot of his mum's influence in him about being a proud, wise warrior, etc. And then obviously he goes back to his dad, Ragnar, who he's certainly a lot alike. Gets this kind of womanizing charm, and his weakness is basically women and his own pleasure, and sometimes he doesn't think, I don't think he means to do it, I don't think he means to be a womanizer and to break people's hearts and what have you, but he kind of has it in him, basically. And Björn's story is a great one. He obviously goes on raids and whatnot with Ragnar. He learns his trade, and he is ultimately the greatest warrior of the time, if you like, the most famous. And his name Ironside comes from the fact that he has lots of scrapes in the show, such as at the gates of Paris and here, there and everywhere, where he kind of gets this image that he cannot be killed, that he is immortal, and yeah, he's part god and what have you, which is obviously, you know, that's understandable from the time and in the show. Ultimately, he is killed towards the end of it, which is very sad. But in a way, they kind of honour his immortality by kind of strapping him to a horse with his last breaths to scare the enemy, because they think they've killed him, and again he's back there. He is immortal, even though they've heard he was dead, practically seen him die. He's there, back on that horse, proud warrior and a fantastic leader who leads his men to victory even when he's kind of dead. So yeah, that's Björn. And what I've picked for Björn is Petra. And there's a reason I've picked Petra, because Petra's it's not a clone, it's not an inspiration of etc, but it's a lot like Coco Mademoiselle, but it's got much more to it. It's much more fruity, it's much more louder, much more charming, smoother, easier to wear. And I think that's what you could say about Björn. He's that version of Ragnar, and of course his mum, who again has all that charm, that wit. She's probably a better leader than Ragnar, and she's Lagertha, this is we're talking about. Obviously he will get some of that to him, and also I think, apart from being this fantastic warrior and great man that he was, well, great vulnerable kind of man with chinks in his armour, let's say, he delivers one of the best kind of lines and parts of the show, which is where he's having a conversation with Rollo, who probably was his dad, could have been his dad, and he kind of, I think he already knows about the rumours and stuff, and he kind of says, let's face it, what does it matter? Who am I most like? Who do people say I'm most like, look most like, act most like, am most like, was brought up by? So blood in the end doesn't matter. I am my father's son, I am Ragnar's son. I'm paraphrasing, but that's like a really powerful moment again to some of us who've, well, had thoroughly unpleasant stepfathers, but some very good stepfathers who are very much just a father. It's who brings you up, who loves you, who influences you, and all of that, isn't it? So anyway, that's me waffling, but that's Björn, and that's Petra from Last. So next up is another historically important figure. I've put him before the family because he is probably, if not more important historically, but also probably a bigger character than some of the others because he's forever there, and that's King Harold Finetooth, the king of the Norwegians in the end. But anyway, we're focused on the show, and he's basically he starts off very ambitious. He wants that throne. He thinks it's his God-given right. He's not a bad guy, but he does do everything he needs to do. There's a lot of backstabbing, a lot of mistrust, a lot of going against Ragnar, going against the others, a lot of trying to turn such and such against such and such, and he's complicated. And by the end of it, he sacrifices himself ultimately to die the kind of Viking warrior way. He knew it was coming, but he fighted a battle he couldn't win, more or less. But he craved that because he did eventually get all he wanted. Became a king, he was ruling, he sort of had the queen he wanted, even though she didn't love him, etc. He was empty and sad when he got all he wanted, which I suppose is immoral, isn't it, really? So he sacrifices himself. Or does he commit? It's difficult. This is in the show, not in real life. Maybe he wanted to die, but he wanted to go out, up on top. But anyway, what I've picked for him is Baccarat Rouge 540. And the reason I've picked that is it's the new king, isn't it? Whether we like it or not, however you feel about it, it's the king, and I suppose it's the best of the best to a lot of people. It is made by a wonderful perfumer. It is, there's lots of iterations of it now. It started off a trend, a generation, like obviously Harold did. And I think it suits him, and it is probably something that he'd want to wear, so desperate to be king, and then kingly, and then mighty, and all of this. And that's the sort of people who would wear Baccarat Rouge, kind of, a bit showing off, a bit, I've got this really expensive, well-loved, fine perfume kind of thing. And I just think it suits him perfectly. So for Harold Fine Hair is Baccarat Rouge 540. So yeah, next is Witzek, who's... It's difficult because the brothers, they all change with which your favourite is, but I think Witzek's the one I could definitely relate to the most. Got quite a tragic story. He's very close to his brother Snake Eye, Sigrid? I think it's something like that. But he gets killed early on by, is it Iva? I think so. But anyway, he's kind of the one who likes to party it up, Witzek, and he develops like a baby brother kind of thing with them all, where none of them really take him seriously. So yeah, like a Prince Harry, he lives it up and enjoys his life. But tragedy after tragedy happens. Anyway, there's a split in the family because their mum gets killed by Lagertha, but her mum knew what she was doing. Her mum kind of goaded and wanted to die, I suppose, a death like that from Lagertha. But anyway, there's this kind of split in the family, and the revenge, obviously Björn goes another way and they go another way. Anyway, as the story goes on, Ivar gets more and more kind of deluded. We'll come on to him later. I'm not going to go too much into this. So then brothers kind of split a little bit, and Uber goes off. God, I can't remember where. I think he's off to England, and but Vicek chooses to go with Uber, even though he's very much under the control and manipulation of Ivor, and Ivor's furious about this. Anyway, Vicek really regrets this decision in the end, because he's terrified. It's like Ivor has a hold over him, and he becomes more delusional, and he suffers more and more of a breakdown. He then goes back to Ivor, who's a complete lunatic now, and obviously this breaks Vicek even more, and he thinks he's trying to kill him, and all of this is the brothers come back together. Anyway, the point is, I won't go through the entire story of it, but he has this, I don't know, inadequacy syndrome maybe. The others all become kings. He doesn't. Obviously Sigrid dies, but he kind of feels very used and very unworthy and like a bit of a failure, really. I can't even remember if Ragnar has any relationship with him really at all. He never takes him seriously. But yeah, Vicek plans his revenge against Ivor slowly, and by the end he is with Ivor, who's changed. That's what I mean. We'll have to get into the kind of depths of that character when I come to it, but at the very end he accidentally kills Lagertha as well, which he deeply regrets, because he's delusional and he sees her as Ivor coming after him. So, but anyway, there's obviously a lot of spoilers in here if you haven't watched it. But yeah, what I've picked for him is Lelik's Encre Noire, and I've picked that because it's got a certain, it's very dark and melancholy and grim, which is what Vicek's life becomes. It's, if you smell it, it's like these dark, it's like a Viking forest if you like. It's like a dark, dank kind of weird atmosphere. There's smoke in the background, like someone's having a fire in the distance in the forest. It's got obviously like a woody, nice vetiver in there, but also a very sort of bitter, almost green vetiver, and it does have that damp, rainy day kind of feel to it, and I think it's perfect for Vicek. But anyway, that's why I've picked that one for him. But also Vicek does get a good ending. He's one of two of them to survive, is it? Again, watch it. You'll have already watched it if you're watching this. But yeah, he changes his name after he survives and sees Ivor die a hero, and he's also a hero really, to be fair. But anyway, in homage to his dad, he becomes Athelstan. That's what he changes his name to, and goes to live with King Alfred at his court, and I think he probably becomes a deeply devout Christian. Again, the actual history of Vicek, I'm not sure. I can't remember doing about him or hearing about him much as a kid. Anyway, so that's Lelik Encre Noire for Vicek. Next is the character, the most famous, probably more famous than Ragnar even in reality, and I believe his body is in the UK now. Historically, how much is myth and how much is true, but he's one that most likely did exist. Whether he was boneless or crippled or whatever is another thing. But anyway, Ivor in the story, well, when he's born, he's obviously crippled. So Ragnar takes him out to die, which is what they used to do in them days. If you weren't strong enough to be a Viking or whatever. It's cruel now judging it with modern eyes, but they couldn't, he couldn't ever support himself, could he, should anything happen to everyone. But anyway, he doesn't die, and Ragnar kind of brings him back. And he's the very spoilt child. Although he's quite weak and crippled, he is quite spoilt by his mother and that. And again, he suffers from that thing that nobody takes him seriously, that he could be a warrior. But Ragnar takes him away with him to England on one of his raids and whatnot, and he meets the king Athelflad, or no, it's not Athelstan. I can't remember what the king's called. I should know. No, I can't. But anyway, it's Alfred's granddad, basically, the king. But anyway, and he learns a lot of things. And one thing about Ivar that stands out amongst all of them is he's by far the most intellectually gifted and sharp and clever. And he slowly starts to become a kind of a warrior, but also more and more unhinged. Like the way I've discussed, he kills his brother, he falls out with all of his brothers. He sees himself more and more as Ragnar's kind of anointed successor, if you like. Ragnar kind of put that in his brain, and Ragnar saw something in him that others hadn't seen before. He is very devious and very clever. Anyway, as the story develops, he gets more and more unhinged, more and more disturbing, up until the point where he's kind of he's hell-bent on revenge for his mother, for one thing, but he takes over the place, and he anoints himself king, and there's people in his ear saying he's some sort of god. That's his wife, who he's impotent, which obviously deeply affects him for his entire life, really. Or is he just infertile? Well, he's probably both, but that deeply affects him psychologically as well. But she pretends to get pregnant by him, but it's not by him. And then the child's some sort of miracle because he's a god and a son of God, and he all gets very delusional and mental. And there's parts throughout it where you really despise Ivar. He's very cruel, very manipulative, very, very nasty. He is probably, again, as a warrior, he's very brave, but as the planning and all of that goes, he's an absolute master, and he changes the way the Vikings fight and adapt, etc. Anyway, towards the end, does he forgive? He lets his grudge go a bit. He changes. He does go through a change, and he knows everyone's terrified of him. He's got a name as kind of some immortal. Oh yeah, he also goes off to it would be Ukraine, I imagine, down through Finland and stuff, to sort of he has a whole adventure with the Rus people, which again teaches him humility, and he does grow, and he has great acts of kindness. He protects the young king, who he sees himself in as quite a bullied, controlled kind of person. He protects and educates him, and frees his people. Anyway, and then he goes for one more raid. He wants to die. He knows he's going to die, and he wants to die with honour in battle, like a good Viking. And in the field, he comes across someone just a random soldier, who stabs him. And obviously everyone crowds round because it's Ivar, and he's like, "You stabbed a god, kill me a god, your names and songs will be written about you." And he's really I'm quite moved. Again, it's when all of them die, like when Björn dies, it's upsetting. When Lagertha goes, it's absolutely heartbreaking, her funeral and stuff. And it's the same with Ivar. Even though you've been on such a roller coaster with him, up and down, when he goes, it's very, very sad. Now, what I've picked for him is a strange one. It's Kajal. It's a Kajal fragrance, and it's called Love Toxin. It was difficult to pick. What I'd pick for him, but the thing about Ivar is, obviously, it's blood red, the fragrance itself, and it smells blood red. It's very, very sweet and very obnoxious, but it's It's not obnoxious in an unwearable way, or it's a pleasure to wear, but I think it represents Ivor's kind of charm and his seductiveness and his power. But flipping that again, it's also got these dangerous sides in it. I think it's got civet and castoreum and probably cumin. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it does have this darkness in there, and it's quite dirty and naughty, and it smells dangerous. So yeah, for Ivor is Love Toxin. So yeah, now we get to the last of the brothers. Probably historically more is known about him. I believe he was one of the kings in England, and that's Ubbe. He's the oldest of them three. Obviously he's younger than Björn. And if you were to compare, he's very much physically and probably the good bits of Ragnar. He's very much got that about him. And ultimately his kind of deal is he wants to complete Ragnar's dream, more so than the other brothers. He's dead determined on that, to discover a new land, a new settlement, make a new place and a new time for them. Ubbe grows up quite uneventfully, really. Obviously he's involved with this fracas between what's his face, Ivor and Björn and stuff, but he's quite, he knows his kind of role and whatnot, and he's quite the peacemaker, and he's quite decent, but he's also an incredibly brave warrior and a very successful warrior, and he nearly dies to try and help save. Does he help save the Saxons from the Danes? I think he does, but he sees the bigger picture. He sees that saving King Alfred. Is it Ethelred the Unready at that stage? No, I think Alfred has become king then. And he sees the wisdom in that they get their own land and they'd be protected if they stop the other Danes doing all their sort of mischief. So, yeah. Anyway, Ubbe in the end, he listens to Floki about Iceland and that, and he wants to go further. He wants to discover somewhere for the Vikings to set up a new way of life, etc. This is not factual, because it wasn't him who got there. Who's to say he didn't, but he was busy in England, so it's very unlikely. But he discovers North America, and he in the end he gets a settlement there. He finds Floki, and they make a kind of, not a utopia, but a different way of life, and he has quite a few struggles there as well, with his men misbehaving and going back to the old Viking ways and betraying the native peoples, etc, etc. Anyway, he's the last scene of the entire show with Floki, which again, like I said before, is the best ending it could have been, where they just sat on the beach watching the world go by, talking about Ragnar and such like. So yeah, for Ubbe, I wouldn't call him boring, but because he's such an honourable kind of good man and what have you, I have picked for him Chanel Allure, but not in an insulting way, because he's steady and he's reliable, he's classic. This fragrance, when it used to smell good, would be one, that somebody like that would wear. Like someone who's got the life sorted and set together, etc. And thinking about it, I kind of feel like I've insulted him a bit with this one, but I did pick this one. But yeah, it's got that kind of sorted together, not overly thinking about anything, not flashy, not complicated particularly, not something it's not trying to be something else, just an old reliable. So that's Chanel Allure for Ubbe. And finally is a non-Viking as such, although he does adapt and becomes quite a part of them during Ragnar's time, and that's Athelstan. Now he's pivotal and so important to the story, like I said before about Witzek changing his name to Athelstan, his Saxon name. But Athelstan is a monk at, oh my god, Holy Island, it's near me, Lindisfarne, that's it. And he gets kind of kidnapped as a slave and what have you, which is what the Vikings did. But Ragnar becomes quite fond of him because he's very educated and he's particularly brave really. Anyway, he goes through quite a lot. He doesn't really see the point in trying to escape and whatnot, and he kind of tries to educate and teach Ragnar, not just about Christianity. He sees the bigger picture than Christianity being the only way, and he sees the similarities between the two faiths. It's just the wanting, you know, to go to paradise after, if you like, and the serving of God. And he's very open-minded, and he educates Ragnar. Ragnar takes him back to kind of educate the king what Ragnar's after and what these Vikings are, etc. And he's quite conflicted while he's there. He's a naughty monk. He sleeps with the king's Ethelred's wife, who he's not fond of anyway. It's also complicated, but anyway, she has a child, a bastard child, and historically, actually, I believe Alfred was a bastard, though I doubt his dad was Athelstan, the monk, random monk. It's more likely to have been, I'd say, the king, because he was very fond of him. But anyway, that king welcomes Athelstan and learns from him. Athelstan's the father of the greatest king of that era of England, allegedly. But anyway, he goes back. They were thinking of sacrificing him because he loves him so much, but he didn't. Him and Ragnar become very close, and Ragnar is like a brother and a teacher to him, and they both learn an awful lot about each other. But obviously Floki, because he's bringing this Christian thing into it, does not like Athelstan. And in the end anyway, Athelstan's murdered, sadly. And it kind of breaks Ragnar, because Athelstan's the most loyal person, because he's honest. And because they're not bonded together in any sort of way, but Athelstan's still there. And Athelstan visits him in visions, etc, etc. And really, Ragnar, does he fully convert to Christianity? Probably not. But he gives Athelstan a Christian burial. He says the Christian words. He really honours Athelstan. And Athelstan stays with him throughout the whole thing. So he's such an important character. But anyway, what have I centred Athelstan with? Gridior. And the reason I picked Gridior is because it's kind of, like we all know, it's this beautiful sitting by it's dried out, by a stream or a lake, just contemplating the world, the smell of the kind of florals by it on a warm, calm summer's day. And I think for a monk and someone as deep and peaceful as Athelstan was, I think it's the perfect one. So for Athelstan, it was Gridior. So yeah, that's just kind of a brief overview of the characters and how I'd sent them. There's some missing, like I would have liked to have put the seer in, and the Swedish king. The names are, I can't walk and think sometimes, but I liked him as well, and he's quite important. And obviously that English king, who I can't remember the name of, even Alfred would have been a good character to have in it. Sigrid would have been, the three boys' mother. I can't remember the kind of new Lagertha, can't remember her name off the top of my head. She would have been great in it as well. Another great person to have in it would have been Tovey, but the truth is she's in it a lot, but she marries everyone and she's completely pointless, completely fictional, just as a connecting thing, and she's really quite irritating, so she's not in it. But anyway, I'm not going to waffle, there's no point. How would you send these guys? Were you a big fan of the show? Have you watched Vikings Valhalla? How do you find that one? For me, it annoyed me that it just seemed to end suddenly. I don't look how many episodes there are, and I'm like, so we have to wait forever for the next one of that. But Vikings is definitely a thing. Obviously I've got my favourite characters, but it's so cleverly written the way you kind of change and like different people. So yeah, thanks for watching, folks. Bye.